We're going to begin our course discussing ethics, social responsibility, and the law. And we're going to talk about how these things fit together and how they are important to us in the study of business law. So, we all have a general idea of what the law is. It's rules of conduct established by a governing authority to maintain harmony, stability, and justice. It defines the legal rights and duties of people, and it provides a means of enforcement. So these are the rules we live by. If people violate these rules, we expect the law to have a backstop in place to enforce these rules. They get in trouble, they go to jail, they get a ticket, things like that. Morals are different. Morals are values that govern a society's attitude towards right and wrong, and most people believe that they should guide the creation of the law. And generally, people prefer law and morals to go together. So we see that in our law, right? We see in the way we respond to law. So most of us, probably me included, don't think twice really about going slightly over the speed limit. It doesn't bother us. We do it. We just hope we don't get caught. So that's technically against the law, but it doesn't bother us that much. And it doesn't bother us that much because it's not really against our moral code. We don't really see a moral obligation to go exactly the speed limit. Murder is against the law. It bothers us a lot because it also goes against our moral compass. We believe it's very wrong to kill. And so punishments are greater, of course, for murder than for speeding. And we like that as a society because that really lines up well with our moral code. Ethics are a system of moral values. So it's almost like a decision-making system based on morals, all codified into one system that help us make decisions that we feel are ethical and moral. All right, so when we talk about ethics versus morals, sometimes these things are hard to really distinguish. Morals are more subjective to the individual. I have a specific moral code that I feel I should abide by. I have things I feel are right and wrong, and those things may not be the same things that you feel are right or wrong. Ethics, however, usually involves a system of broad principles used to make decisions. So when we talk about ethics, it involves morals, but it's not just morals. We use ethics more to guide our decisions that affect us and others. So ethics really connotate a universal application, while morals refer to a personal application. If I'm making a decision that only involves me, a lot of times I just refer to my own moral code. If I'm making a decision at Tarleton, for example, that would affect a large number of people, that's more of an ethical decision. I consider how that's going to affect other people, and really if my morals allow me to make that decision ethically. Here are some examples. It would go against my moral code to help you cheat on the test. This is me and you. This is a decision I make for myself. He appears to view himself as a kind of culture warrior, striking out against the crumbling morals of a modern society. Now, ethics, in the third bullet point down there, it says our class had a debate over the ethics of genetic testing. This genetic testing decision wouldn't just affect me. It's not a decision that just affects me. It affects others. So our morals kind of codified into this ethical system of decision making. We went through that to determine our views on genetic testing. And at the bottom, anybody it seemed could make the music. If they couldn't play guitar, they could push a button, and nobody worried about the ethics of appropriating riffs. So appropriating, of course, means taking something that isn't mine. No one worried about the ethics of taking riffs of quite a few guitar players that weren't mine. Nobody thought of that. Well, they didn't think about the ethical code or the ethical violations of that. All right, we have some theories of law and where law comes from and how it should fit with morals. The first one is natural law. In natural law, we say morality and law are united. That should say are instead of and. Morality and law are united. Law originates from a superior force that stands outside the everyday experience of most people, and laws must be moral to be lawful. And while that sounds good in theory, there are some issues with that. The main issue that we have with that is, who is that superior force? For a lot of us, it might be God, but for others, it's not. It's not God, so they have some other superior force they're relying on. And the problem here is that we all have to live together in society, and we don't all follow the same superior force. So natural law isn't going to work if we have laws originating from all different superior forces. So if we say all laws must be moral to be lawful, some laws aren't going to appear moral to some people while they're going to appear moral to other people. Another issue is that laws don't always have a lot to do with morality. We mentioned speeding earlier. Speeding isn't really that much of a moral issue. It's more of a safety issue. It's still an important law. We don't need people going 100 through neighborhoods. It's important. But it's not really moral. So that theory has a lot of problems. Another theory is positive law. This says law originates from an outside source that has emerged within society, and rights are discovered from society but not invented by society. The difference here between natural law and positive law is that in positive law, this outside source is society, it's not God. Remember in natural law, we had a superior force. And here we also have an outside source, but that outside source is society, not a God type figure. So here we say we just go discover rights. We don't invent rights. And that's how we make our law. Well, this also has some issues. It's not really easily to implement. And again, this is going to differ between what society wants now, what society wants in the future, and what each person within society discovers of their own rights. We also have a negative rights theory. And this one is interesting. It says rights are an out to moral law. It allows people to violate what is morally right, which most of us don't think about laws and rights this way. But in this theory, the right to privacy would actually be an out from truth. It gives us the right to hide from the truth. If we have the right to privacy, we don't have to tell everybody what we've been doing that's morally wrong. Freedom of speech is the right to make false, harmful statements without consequence. We can say whatever we want within reason. We don't get punished even if it's wrong. Freedom of the press originates from the freedom of speech, and freedom of press gives the right to the press to print half-truths without consequence. So in this theory, it says these rights actually disguise morals or hide what is morally right. All right, next we're going to move on to ethical decision making. My first question, can ethics be taught? This is a question that people have asked over and over, and people have pretty strong opinions whether ethics can be taught or not. Ethics are usually guided by people's morals, and a lot of times morals are developed over time, starting at a young age with your parents or your church or basically the society and environment in which you are raised. So in that respect, they can be taught, but it's hard to change them over time. However, in business, this is business law, so in your practice of business, it is important to think through ethical theories and to establish an internal ethical decision-making framework. That's valuable. Practicing that framework will allow you to make better ethical decisions when faced with a dilemma. When you have already thought through your ethical framework, and if you're in a profession like accounting that has its own ethical code of conduct and you're familiar with that, you can kind of run through that in your head when you're making a tough decision. Ethics has a role in business, both at the individual level and the corporate level. We kind of talked about the individual level. If you're faced with a decision that has some ethical implications, your ethical code can guide you and help you make the right decision. But also at the corporate level, an ethical corporation is becoming more important. A lot of that has to do with millennials. As they have entered the workforce, they've been more interested in corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and corporate citizenship. And ethical corporations, in the eyes of millennials, have attracted top talent. And therefore, when you attract top talent, you usually have better profits, have better results, etc. So ethical principles and systems help companies attract the best workers and clients. And we have some ethical theories here in your book. The first is market value ethics, which is more commonly called neoliberalism. This is a vision of society where competition for wealth is the only recognized value, and virtually all social decisions are left to unregulated markets. When we listen to that, we don't like that. Probably we don't want every decision reduced to a dollar value. It prevents an opportunity for a lot of corruption and greed, and it hurts a lot of us who don't possess as much currency, money, as others. It's a world in which everything is for sale. So we treat everything as being for sale, and the value placed on things is dictated by the value in money in which they can glean. We obviously don't like this, but if we really think through how the world works, this theory is alive and well in a lot of our systems, and it has implications in healthcare, right? We know that wealthy get much better healthcare, and they have much better access to healthcare. And depending on how you feel about that, that may really bother you. We may not like market value ethics in that, but it's very much alive and well. Art in schools. We're cutting funding for art in schools. We are not seeing a dollar value return on art, so we're just cutting it. Majors in college. You're in college, and you've probably had so much advice given to you about what major you select, and don't pick a major that you don't earn a high salary. It's not worth it. College isn't worth it unless you earn a great rate of return on your investment. That's market value ethics. That's placing value only on a dollar value rate of return. When we use money as the only yardstick, we're going to miss out on other benefits and views, right? It tells us we can cheat in school and get all A's and get a job and make a lot of money, and that's right because market value ethics tells us it is. We get more money. Who cares about the violation of our values, that cheating is wrong? Who cares that when we go out to work, our employer will realize we don't really know anything because we cheated our way through school? Market value ethics leads to corruption. If the most money wins, we'll do anything to get the most. And this theory doesn't condemn that. It says that's fine. All right, so we see a lot of problems with that, hopefully. The next theory we're going to talk about is the social contract ethics theory. It says right and wrong are measured by the obligations imposed on each individual by an implied agreement among all the people within a particular social system. All those people agree they have a right to live and a right to live in peace and security, and an ethical system should be built around that. Other rights are subordinated to these. The problem here really is that it's unstable, and it doesn't address what happens when one's right to live in peace and security clashes with another's right to do the same. So what we define as peace and security may clash with another's definition of peace and security, and then what happens? That's unstable. The next theory is utilitarianism. It says morality of actions is going to be determined by their effects. So when you're making a decision, you look at what produces the most good for the most number of people, and that's the more ethical course of action. So that also sounds good on its face, but there's a lot of fallacy in that thinking because, first of all, what is good? We have to decide the more good for the most number of people. But what do we decide is good, and who gets to make that decision? There's no guidance on that. And you kind of are looking at this after the fact because when we make a decision, all the effects of that decision can't be seen immediately. So it's hard to make a decision and know what's going to produce the most good for the most number of people with certainty. It also would leave some weaker members of society to suffer greatly because while a decision might do the most good for the most number of people, those that suffer, the sick, the poor, the needy, may suffer from that decision, and they may suffer greatly. And we kind of overlook those people in the utilitarianism theory. And finally, rational ethics. This assumes that humans are rational and should have the same ethical beliefs. It's based on human reasoning. So we determine what we wish would happen to us and not happen to us, and that becomes our rules that govern society. Again, this one is hard to implement and assumes a lot of rational decision making that may not always happen. Moving on to corporations and corporate social responsibility. Corporations are very important in our world, in our country. They affect business, they affect our lives. Corporations, as a review, corporations are legal people. So unlike a sole proprietorship or a partnership, a corporation can own property. A corporation can sue. It can be sued. It files a tax return and pays taxes directly. It receives constitutional rights, and therefore it has a great effect on the economy and business. Corporations, also as a review, are owned by their shareholders. So you buy shares in a corporation, you're part owner. And their main purpose is to make money for those shareholders. They're responsible to shareholders because shareholders can change the composition of the board of directors, and then the board of directors are the people who hire and fire key executives. So shareholders are the people at the top of the food chain. They can change the direction of a corporation. Traditionally, we have thought of the responsibility that corporations have just as a responsibility to their shareholders to increase the rate of return on their investment. That's utility thinking. We take a cost-benefit analysis anytime we make a corporate decision to see if this decision will return more to the shareholders than it cost. Higher return than cost. If so, we did whatever increased the most benefit to our shareholders and cost less. That was the decision we made. We only considered our shareholders. We didn't consider anyone else. But recently, we have started to think about corporations and their responsibility to those other than shareholders. And we've done that for a few reasons. First, because the corporation, like we just talked about, is a legal person. So in return for all of those benefits, those legal benefits of becoming a person, a corporation also owes some duty because of that. We as individual citizens, we as individual people have to owe duty to the rest of our individual citizens. Likewise, corporations should as well. Also, the impact of corporations. We talked about corporations and how they're legal people. And corporate decision-making impacts much more than shareholders. It impacts the environment. If a corporation decides to cut corners and illegally dump or cut corners and pollute the world, that affects the environment, not just their shareholders. It affects employees. If a corporation relocates somewhere or closes down a division or adds a division, that's going to affect employees. Corporations affect the towns and where they're located, the states and where they're located. So they have impact on a lot of people and areas beyond just their shareholders. And then finally, another reason that we are interested in corporate social responsibility is self-interest. We talked about millennials before, and we talked about how millennials are interested in ethical corporations. And there's a lot of research and a lot of people who believe that corporations who act responsible, socially responsible, actually do return more to their shareholders in the end. It might take longer and it might not be as clear, but people expect corporations to act responsibly, and therefore those that do are rewarded, and their shareholders likewise are rewarded.